Good morning, everybody. Super happy to be here. Is that better? So, I'm Doug Mouton. I'm an advisor for the industry. I represent a number of folks like Fidelis New Energy. I work with BlackRock. I work with Stargate, OpenAI. I help out NVIDIA. Coming from the US and bringing a lot of perspective and curiosity to the table today. In the last 2 weeks in the US, it has been a bit of a whirlwind. We had GTC, which was hosted by Jens, and we saw the roadmap for all the NVIDIA servers. Not only the 100 kilowatt racks that we're all talking about now, but we saw Blackwell being previewed and Rubin after that, up to 600 kilowatts per rack. This is a tremendous movement in our space right now. On top of that, we had DCD New York, a very big conference just earlier in the week. And it's energy is just palpable around how are we going to solve this problem? What we see in the market is like a 30% CAGR globally. And that breaks down into basically half of our workloads, 15%, are traditional loads that we've been working on for years. Performance, compute, storage. And that business is there and it's going to absorb capacity for a long time. AI sits on top of it, and it's becoming a bit of a challenge to get our brain around because the technology inside the data centers is changing so much, and we have to support all of our clients. So in the US, there's a large feeling that we have to come together and come up with what are some of the standards of solutions that we have to get to for AI factories so that we can be kind of a better partner with the supply chain and kind of align everyone on what we need to be successful. There's a lot to think about. So what's exciting to me about being here today with the panel is to try to bring some of these same issues to the European landscape and get some of the leaders here of the biggest colo providers in the European market to share their thoughts. So I've prepared some comments. I asked my followers on LinkedIn what they'd want to hear about. The number one thing they want to hear about is where you guys are building next, obviously. But we'll try to get to that one in a way that's respectful. But just right here, we got, I'm going to do my best as an American to say these names beautifully. Michalis, Grigoratos. Close, huh? Olivier, Michelli. Okay. And then Neil Cresswell, I can do that one pretty easily. Yeah. And then Guillaume, Sampic. Okay, very good. So let's kick it off right up. First topic will be like the scale of AI-driven infrastructure. I'm going to start out with you, Neil. So Neil, AI workloads are pushing data centers to unprecedented scales. What are the biggest challenges in expanding infrastructure to meet this gigascale demand?
Thanks, Doug. I hope you can hear me. Good morning, everybody. First of all, wonderful to be here in Greece, in Athens at this time of year, especially. Right, where do I start? It's a huge opportunity and a great industry to be in, as we heard already. But with every big opportunity, there are challenges, and I think the scale of that we're looking at now brings its own individual challenges. All of us have been involved in building data centers for probably longer than we care to remember, but the building a 500 megawatt data center is a very different proposition from building a 50 megawatt data center. And there's the obvious things like the location for connectivity, for power, for land is still critical, but access to power for that amount of power is a challenge everywhere in Europe, everywhere in the world, really. If you talk to the grids that I talk to on an almost daily basis, anything over 300 megawatts has probably got a 5-year plus lead time at the moment, and that doesn't take into account the supply chain. So, power not easy. Capital, it takes a lot of money, billions to develop, tens of billions sometimes to develop these kind of data centers. And that's in an environment where data center technology inside the data center probably hasn't changed a great deal in the last 10, 15 years, but it's changing rapidly now with liquid cooling. So do your investors want to invest for a 20, 30-year project when you might have to refresh it in a couple of years or 2 or 3 or 4 years. Challenge, not easy. Connectivity, typical cloud CPUs that we all build and operate run at 10 to 40 gigabits a second. AI, RDMA, GPU chips run at up to 800 gigabits a second. There's not many places in Europe, especially, that can deliver that kind of connectivity. And then more mundane challenges. We saw in the UK last weekend at a major airport, which I won't mention. If you don't sort your backup generation out, things can go horribly wrong. So, when you've got a 500 megawatt data center, if you want to run that on diesel generators, that's a lot of diesel generators and a lot of fuel. It needs to be, different creative solutions. So all of these things are not easy, but, I'm an optimist. We are solving these problems, one by one. I was talking to Doug this morning. We were saying there was a young US president in the 60s said, we choose to do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And we will solve those problems. And I thought it would be remiss of me. And one of the reasons is we need to solve those problems, and we are solving them. And day by day, week by week, we're coming up with creative solutions for that. And humans have a history stretching back thousands of years of solving problems like this. And I thought, as I was in Athens, the birthplace of philosophy, 2,400 years ago, another young man called Plato wrote that necessity is the mother of all invention here in Athens. And that is what we are seeing in our industry today, that solutions are being found, whether it's nuclear, who knows, maybe not in the next 5 years, but other solutions are being found and put forward by a lot of capital, and a lot of very bright thinking tends to find these solutions.
Outstanding, thank you. Guillaume, I want to move over to you and talk about, as AI applications grow globally, how must infrastructure adapt to support regions with limited digital capacity?
Thank you. So I wanted to first take the first part of your question in terms of AI demand and what we call the gigascale economy, right? And then give, as we said before, we are a global player, so I feel privileged to be able to share like a global view in terms of what we see in the demand coming from multiple types of service providers. So I think the key message is it's not just with one type of segment. This demand is not only driven by hyperscalers. It's a much broader set of demand, and therefore it's here to stay in terms of Gen AI demand. So hyperscalers, obviously, continuous investments. We see a lot of this in the US and in Europe. The new currency is 100 megawatts. So that's kind of the new currency in terms of what they're looking for. So a huge amount of demand there. Very much lined up to that, the subcategory around GPU cloud. So in a few hours, we'll hear from our friends CoreWeave in terms of how that's going. And then their first day of trading at Wall Street. So that's going to be very interesting to see where that's going. We've been on that journey with them, with our deployment in London, in terms of a large-scale GPU deployment, and also their movement from single tenant to multi-tenant in terms of their openness and partnership with OpenAI, but also movement from training to inference. I think that's, for us, the absolutely key trend. So that's kind of GPU cloud. Then what we see is a second-tier platforms. So think about the ServiceNow, this word, the SAP. And this is very interesting because Gen AI is core differentiator for their value proposition. Therefore, they have no other choice than to invest in their own infra on top of hyperscalers. So, of course, they will continue to go after demand with hyperscalers, but they're also building increasingly their own infrastructure and then partnering with players like us to kind of deploy that. And that's quite meaningful because often they are after like 20 megawatts in a number of countries, in a number of regions for inference deployment. So that's a very interesting type of demand. And then, of course, all of this is driven by ultimately enterprise demand, right? So it's how we already say this journey is not linear. So more and more enterprises are using Gen AI. Their ROI, in terms of return on investment, is not always great. So sometimes there's a bit of disillusion. It's not always like that rosy, right? So, but what we see is that the most mature enterprises, they're really starting to think about what's the network requirements of AI, where that's going, and how do we secure the data. We collocate the AI next to our private data, and then we ensure there is the right latency and requirements. So just to say, from a demand perspective, it's broad, therefore it's here to stay. And then from our perspective, we're here for the long term in terms of investing in terms of digital infrastructure. So what we see is that this impacts the regions and the regional infrastructure in a different way. So obviously, the US has a very clear leadership when it comes to training models. But what's interesting is that Europe is becoming a lending area for a lot of that inference demand. And it's not just from US players, because we have a lot of deployments coming from Asian players, Chinese cloud providers, and increasingly from Middle East in terms of how they're thinking about inference deployments into Europe. So I think there's a real opportunity for Europe to also capture some of that demand, do some of the training, but also capture some of these inference deployments in the region. And then the scale of the opportunity means that it's all about collaboration, not just within this industry, but also beyond, with the main utilities, power and water, increasingly, in terms of how we can face that demand.
Well said. I really like the way that you're underpinning the fact that all this growth is everyone. It's the smaller enterprises, it's the larger ones, it's not just the hyperscalers, not just AI, it's the whole ecosystem. So I really appreciate that and the commitment to helping everyone grow. That's fantastic. So I'm gonna close out this topic with an open question to the group. It's gonna be this one. What's the most pressing bottleneck, power, space, or connectivity in scaling up the AI-driven future? Anyone can jump on this one.
Yeah, well, for sure, one is on the list. For me, it's power, by far. And what is not on the list is authorization. Yeah, because it's a bottleneck.
Entitlement to build,
because to make a data center, you need, of course, land, power, but as well, you need authorization. So just to come back on your least power, by definition, I mean, it's, we need to install gigawatts in Europe, in the US, and in Asia-Pac. And we predict more than 60 gig to be installed in the next 5 to 6 years. It's about 40 trenches of last nuclear power, which is just massive. And where is the power? Right. Sorry, the power can be there, as the minister said, but in terms of distribution, there is a tension on all the grids, being in the US or in Asia-Pac or in Europe. So for me, from my perspective, power is the most critical point. And authorization, which is not on the list, I mean, all the countries are more and more, trying to regulate the digital in general, digital infra in general, and get the environmental permit, get the building permits, and get all the permits is more and more complex.
Oh, that's really well said, Olivier. I didn't mention that, and you're right. If I think about the US, one of the things we struggle with is getting just an interconnect agreement with utilities. It takes sometimes 3 to 4 years before they can study the grid and tell us what the impacts of the grid are. I suspect similar things are happening in Europe as well. Wow.
Can I?
Please, jump on.
Yeah. The one thing you're missing there is people.
Okay, I like it. Tell me more.
The reason why, power is a big issue. Okay, connectivity, we can somehow get there. Land, there's plenty of land will make it safer to build a data center, but then how do you bring people to your location? And now we're doing utility grade projects, right? So this is multi-year projects, multi-billions, mega scale, and you have to bring them there to build it, and then you have to keep them there to operate for the next 20 years. So again, limiting factor, and we cannot just, we can invent, nuclear power.
Right.
You cannot invent 200 operational people to land in a remote location 3 hours from civilization. So that's going to be the next frontier.
How is that working in Europe? I know in the US, like electricians, we're struggling. And then with the cooling, pipe fitters to make these large cooling. Where are the areas of gaps that you're seeing, Michalis?
What, in trades?
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Across the stack.
It's across, and basically what's happening right now, so there is a lot of shift from people that they used to do kind of trades in other life sciences, like corporate real estate, hospitals. They're all retraining and becoming data center engineers. There's adjacencies to these industries, but the operational side of things is a whole different beast. Right now, we're just concentrating on the building phase. But as Neil said, running a 500 meg data center is not an easy task.
It's no joke, huh?
Running 250 gensets and starting all at the same time. You got 15 seconds. You need proper solid operational bit.
Outstanding. We're going to stick with you. On topic 2, funding the $1 trillion revolution. Michalis, estimates peg AI infrastructure as a $1 trillion opportunity. How should investors prioritize their focus, data centers, energy, or connectivity? And again, you guys are pointing out I've got a few things wrong, like entitlement as well as the people.
Okay, so just put some numbers on the table, and hopefully my co-panelists will agree. So a 20 meg AI data center, as a total investment, is about $500 to $600 million. Okay, so just the three guys here, they have multiple billions already publicly.
Right here at the table.
Just the three of them, right? So there's a huge amount of money. Then the other thing is that we work with a lot of Ps and LPs, and there is a calculation that by 2045, AI as an investment grade vehicle is going to surpass global real estate. So global real estate right now is $280 trillion worth of value. And they're estimating the whole AI, not just the data centers, the apps and the market cap for AI will surpass global real estate.
That blows my mind.
It's an insane number, but obviously this guy is investing and they know what they're saying, so hopefully, so we need a lot of money, and we need for that money to start trickling through to the right places. And I think right now there is a huge amount of discussion. Everyone is stating about big numbers. Not everyone is going to be a winner here, because if you don't have access to capital all the way through, you won't be able to make it. So there's just a lot of demand, but eventually the capital will land in the pocket. So I think during our pre-discussion, we are really good at solving problems that we all had to deal with before. We're good at solving LAN. We're good at solving network. We'll eventually sort power, where there's nuclear and where there's discussions with governments. All of that's going to come. But solving the funding of all of that, I think it's going to require a lot of trust between your investors, right? Why is your investor going to give you 23 billion versus someone else? So it needs to be trust. You need to be able to deliver consistently, and you'll be able to demonstrate that you can maintain and operate that asset for the 20-year lifespan. Just to throw in a spanner into works, the data center, the AI workloads, and the operational aspect of it, and the tech refresh of AI is completely different from what we used to do in the past. I mean, you all remember tech refresh is typically 3.5 to 5 years.
Yep.
Tech refresh in the AI space, 18 months.
It could be. Isn't that something? We saw Ruben showing up 6 months after Blackwell.
155 kW per rack to 300 to 600. There is rumors, some seen it, some not, but there is a 1.5 meg rack out there.
This coming.
It's not a normal rack. It's not a 1200 by 800, but it's called a rack, and it's a meg and a half. So we have a good ride. So.
Okay, thank you. Let's stick to funding. Olivier. Building this gigawatt scale or gigascale backbone requires massive capital. What financing models or partnerships can drive this transformation?
Well, that's a good question. Okay. Well, the sector is super capital intensive. As you rightly said, you need a lot of money basically at the start, but all the way through. And it's not just millions, it's billions of billions. And that's why actually all the data center platforms are managed by strong capital, basically firm or investment firm. So I would say one is to have the right sponsor, capital partner, that is able to follow the growth of the company. But still, even if you are with one of the largest investment firm in one of the largest fund, you have some limitations because in general, an asset can't, go over 15 to 20% of a fund. So you have some limitations, and when you need, tens of billions of euros or dollars to grow, this is not sufficient. So there are different ways where you can do some financial engineering and basically finance or basically monetize our mature assets, your mature assets, to get the money, bring new investors with lower risk profile, use this money to fund the growth. So that's one way. The second, of course, lever is all the debt market in general. You have the traditional bank loans that is still working quite well, but all the private bank is interesting, and as well some instruments coming from which are quite popular in the US, like the asset-backed securities with a higher lever that we are basically looking at, obviously. So there are different pockets, and you can use basically to fund the growth. There is another aspect of your question where I agree, where I think it's interesting on very large-scale development. Gigawatt campus, where just on the data center side will represent a 10 billion euros or dollars investment. It's to partner with different bodies to mitigate the risk, and as well allocate or share the pain of the capital allocation.
Yep.
And at Data4, we're looking at this kind of, with Brookfield, this kind of, things. One last thing I want to say is, the data center platform, our operator, we operate because we have technicians and engineers, but we are investor. We have massive, balance sheet. And I think one of the things, that's what we do at Data4, is we have a team in charge of the funding strategy, but that's guys from the banking industry, from the investment firms. So you need to have this kind of team inside the company to basically put in motion all the cash you need to the source of fund to fund basically the growth.
Yeah, it's not as simple as just get some equity, get some off-take debt agreements and go after it. It feels like now you need almost like the Berkshire Hathaway kind of partners that are willing to partner with you and hold that asset for a really long time, because these are long-term investments that will clearly create a bunch of cash, provided the investor's appetite is to hold that asset. Sometimes they want to get out sooner or later. So I imagine it's more and more complicated for you guys.
Yeah.
Open question on the funding side, guys. How do we ensure this investment surge doesn't widen the gap between developed and emerging markets? Is this going to just feed the rich markets and starve out the emerging markets? How do we keep this gap from creating a two-class play? Anyone can jump on that one.
I think Virtus is part of the STT group based in Singapore. So we're building 5 big campuses across Europe, 100 megawatt ones, developed countries. But we're also building in the Philippines, in Thailand, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and it's very similar. And there you're dealing with the governments for power, and in some ways, going back to Olivier's point about authorizations, it's probably a bit easier and a bit more smooth, because you're in an environment of a very, very small number of players. There's not, if you look at Germany, there's 3 times the demand of the current gig in outstanding requests for power. They've got no idea what to do in the German grid. How are they possibly going to fulfill all of those? They can't. But in some of the developing countries, India the same, it's the ability to deal directly with the government and get ahead is maybe a bit easier than some of the developed countries.
Fair question.
Sorry, just to intervene, because we're in Greece.
Yeah.
So it's great to talk about Greece. So we're developing a campus in Athens, in Greece, and I totally agree with what Neil said. Is when we arrived to build our 80 meg campus in Athens, we get the support and the attention of the Prime Minister, who basically come to do the first stone ceremony. Prime Minister Mitsotakis. In our campus, try to get Emmanuel Macron in France to do the first stone ceremony in one of our campus. Yeah, you can dream. So I agree. It's a very developed market country, Greece. I'm not saying, but you get the attention of the highest level of the state, which is of course very, very useful in the development of our projects.
That's very well said. Thank you for that.
So we started 13 years ago when I started Inverters, so I'm on my 5th Prime Minister in the UK now. So.
It is exciting to see the data center development kind of walk across, the European continent, and to be here in Athens and to see the growth it's a great example of that. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, so here's a topic 3, sustainability in the gigascale economy. Neil, I'm going to stick with you. AI's energy demands are soaring. What practical steps can data centers take to balance efficiency and sustainability?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that delivering computing from a very large 100 megawatt data center on a cloud basis is easily the most energy efficient and environmentally friendly way of delivering a compute unit that mankind has ever invented. Way more efficient than the way we used to do it 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So, at its core, it's more efficient, and GPUs are just going to enhance that. So Olivier and I, similar, our 30, 40, 50 megawatt data centers are largely powered by renewable energy, solar, wind, tide, where available, which is pretty much everywhere in the countries we operate. So we're delivering with low PUEs, 1.1, 1.2. So, we are delivering energy efficient compute, better than washing machines and tumble dryers, I guarantee you. So, but computers use a lot of electricity. So do electric cars. You can't get away from that, but the benefits they provide are amazing today and only going to get more. So I think in terms of more sustainable methods of construction, I think we're looking into that and doing some the way we build, using less concrete, etc., more sustainable ways of operations as well. Maybe not diesel generators, maybe something else, and 600 kilowatt racks sound a lot, but I look a bit younger, or younger than I am, hopefully. But I started my first job at IBM in the mid '80s was working on an IBM mainframe computer 40 years ago. And the 600 kilowatt rack is just a mainframe, really, by another name. And they used a lot of electricity, not 600 kilowatts, but we have solved these problems before, and I think putting more and more compute in big, centralized, or maybe more distributed, really well run, well built, well constructed, well managed, efficiently run and operated, professionally managed data centers is about as good as you can probably get.
Absolutely, yeah. You want to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of points. So I think as an industry, look, we're getting a lot of negative press about the amount of power we're using and all the rest of it. But I think, as with every problem, we have to look at it holistically. So we cannot live without data centers. Like, it's impossible. Also, when you start thinking, we all travel here. We all use a data center to build our tickets, make a booking for the hotel, book a taxi to come here. So the alternative to that will be a very carbon-heavy alternative, right? You have to drive to a travel agent and sit down, and they will have to ring someone. So all of that's a saving. The other thing is that AI is concentrating energy consumption in a single place. So it's becoming a utility place. So from an efficiency point of view, you need a lot less to consume more power in a single place rather than the distributed. Inference is a different game, but it's concentrating a huge amount of power. As an industry, I think, we're trying to get concrete out, green concrete, precast. We as a business, we use a lot of steel and a lot of recyclable components. But I think if you sit down and think about, okay, what industry can I put in hundreds of billions of dollars? Because it's an investment and people need returns, right? Shareholders need returns. So what business you're going to put in hundreds of billions of dollars that is going to deliver the return with such a huge amount of carbon emission? So, let's pick an industry. I don't know, steel smelting or aluminium smelting. So as an industry, okay, we quite heavy when we're building something, but nothing stays there for 20 years. It's a good neighbor. Okay, it's a bit noisy. We can alleviate that. We can put it in places where there's no people around. But apart from that, you take an electricity and you turn it into zeros and ones. There's no nasties coming out of it, right? So as a factory, it's a pretty clean factory. So I always say to people, yes, we do consume a lot, but the alternative would have been 100 times. No one wants to live next to a cement factory. A lot of people would be happy to be close to a data center that is managing, noise attenuation.
That's a great point. And Neil, the point you make that the higher density, higher efficiency, we're actually getting more flops per second. We're doing more compute power with less. That is efficiency, and that does drive, more efficient use of stuff. I'm cognizant of time, so...
We got 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. The 10-minute one. I was looking for the clock there. Okay, so let's jump down to topic 5, the global perspective, and I want to go over to Guillaume. Energy and connectivity differ worldwide. How do these variables shape the global rollout of AI infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, the kind of mix of the AI opportunity is very different per region as well, so it can be very different. So, the forecast we have in Europe, we think that by 2028, 2030, 75% of the opportunity would be inference. So that's kind of almost a natural consequence, but a lot of this demand is still ahead of us, right, in terms of where that's going to go, what type of deployments. So we have seen some of the large 20 to 50 megawatt deployments. We're starting to see some of the smaller formats of inference, like more in the 2 to 5 megawatts. But if you take hundreds of them, this is in a constrained environment, in usually dense area, constrained both from a power and water utility, then that's a significant impact, right? So when it comes to Europe, really, for us, one of the main difference is around inference and how we think about this. The overall impact is also looking for specific solutions. So we have a very big business in Africa where we are one of the leading data center companies, so looking at opportunities to do things differently. So in South Africa, for example, we have our own solar power generation, so 120 megawatts locally of production. I think we're going to see a lot more coming from this industry in terms of creative ways to either partner or potentially do our own kind of solutions when it comes to power production. And then obviously renewable. So we're starting to build our gigawatt campus in Dallas next to Washington. So again, at the core of this needs to be renewable sources of energy for the US and partnership, and potentially more than partnership in terms of local production. And then the last thing I would say is really again to the point around ecosystem. So thinking about the impact in terms of the whole ecosystem. We touched a bit in terms of the complexity of a data center, in terms of thinking about the scope, like obviously 1 and 2, but also increasingly scope 3. I mean, you take a training on inference hub, so you think about the amount of fiber in this building and the impact it has all like end to end. So that's really pushing the next frontier in terms of how globally we can start solving some of these issues together with our ecosystem partners. We can think about solutions locally and globally to these type of solutions. And then we are just next to the Mediterranean Sea, so obviously the most connected area when it comes to subsea. So for us, all this trend confirms our strategy in terms of really leading with an ecosystem value proposition, connected. So we are heavily investing in the Mediterranean region. So obviously it's Greece with more than 20 years presence here, but it's also Heraklion, it's also Italy, it's also Spain. So it's a whole region, including Tel Aviv and Israel, right? So that's how we think about this all in all, to get the right resiliency and to be able to start thinking about lending some of this AI inference opportunity as well.
Fascinating. Really helped me think about the Mediterranean as kind of like the center point, almost connecting the world. It's in a unique spot.